Good afternoon, guys. All right, so we're going to go through your PowerPoint notes. I posted those this morning, so hopefully you were able to write down the extra. The extra for this page is in blue. So we'll discuss, I'm sure most of you have heard by now that there's for sure an extension on school closures. So I'm going to do some brainstorming and figure out how we can squeeze in some assessments, whether it's just a small quiz or whatever, just because I was kind of banking on the idea that we would be back next week and kind of do a good review and do a quiz then, but I'll figure out something, okay? What I might do is your World War II project, I might grade as both a project grade and a test, just because there's so many pieces to it, and that might be a good way for me to assess whether you're getting the material or not. So I'm going to think on it, and I'll let you know for sure though, okay? All right, so today is just an introduction to World War II and what happens, and I'm kind of reading off of your PowerPoint as I go. So if you want to have your notes out in front of you as I go through this, and you can kind of follow along that way. So the biggest thing that we're going to do, and this is kind of your bell ringer question, is we're going to stop everything. We're going to go back to our isolationist policies. We're not going to get involved in the very beginning, just because similar to World War I, and that we didn't think that it involved us. We've got a whole ocean that separates us, and we are not physically involved until, again, incidents happen. So we're watching what's going on overseas, but we're still worried about us because mid-1930s into the late 1930s, we still have the Great Depression that we're facing. So we want to worry and fix our problems here at home before we worry about anything anywhere else. We do hear about what's happening overseas. We're watching very closely about what's happening overseas. We have what we call the good neighbor policy in place, to where we won't interfere unless we feel like we need to. And we're worried about protecting our, quote, neighborhood, which is North and South America, and not going outside of our hemisphere for right now. And we established what we call the Neutrality Acts, to where we're not going to do business with nations that are at war. And that's kind of part of what we had established with the Keller-Brand Pact outlawing war, and we want to kind of stick to that, even though we won't be able to stick to it very long. Roosevelt does win the 1936 re-election, almost a landslide. The Democrats had a guy that most people don't even know, because he didn't get but, I don't know, what was it, like 50 or less than that votes? I don't remember. There's one election where the other guy only got 5 votes. Bless his heart. But anyway, but Roosevelt wins re-election in 1937 when he is officially starting his second term in office. He gives what he calls the quarantine speech. And we know, modern day, we know right now what that means. Quarantine means you stay where you're at. You don't go outside of it. It's kind of like encouraging people to quarantine themselves in their house right now, meaning you don't go outside your house, you don't get around other people. Well, when it comes to World War II, we are quarantining ourselves inside of the United States. We're not going outside of the United States. So not getting involved. Again, kind of going back to the idea of isolationist policies. Okay, let's keep going. The biggest thing to get in your mind this week, and make yourself a note, star, highlight, circle, underline, make sure that you get it, are the major players. Know who they are, what country they're associated with, and what their ideals are. So the second slide on your notes page starts with Japan. Notice that these are your Axis powers, all except for Russia. And we'll talk about Russia here in just a second. So Japanese aggression starts 1937. So again, all things get ramped up mid-1930s to late 1930s in Asia and in Europe. And again, we're not focusing on getting involved. We're just watching to see what happens. So Japan, for a very long time, this is nothing new, we've been talking about this several times because history repeats itself, that Japan has always been kind of eyeballing China. We know Japan is an island nation. We know that China is a very large nation with lots of natural resources, land, timber, etc. And so Japan kind of sees China as this weak little wildebeest, if you will, where Japan sees itself as this jaguars that's going to pounce on him, you know? So anyway, China is not very strong in their governments and military, so Japan kind of feels like they can pounce on them and take them over and it'll all be okay, nobody's watching kind of a thing, which is not true because we're watching, mostly because of business and trade interested, anyway, you get it, interest, as well as allies. We see China as an ally of ours. So anyway, Japan invades 1937 and takes over Manchuria, China. As soon as they do that, we go ahead and we officially say, all right, that's fine. That's how you're going to play. We will cut off all trade and all business with Japan, which is not good for them because they actually rely pretty heavily on the U.S. and getting natural resources that they don't have, again, because they're an island nation. So this is going to put them in a bind, but it's okay. They knew that we were going to do this, and as soon as we did it, then they're going to start putting all the pieces of the puzzle together to construct what we will know later as the attack on Pearl Harbor. So that's coming. We already know that's coming, but that's one of the dominoes that lines up to create what we know as the attack on Pearl Harbor. Make sure that you know the leaders. So for Japan, we have Emperor Hirohito and his general Tojo. Those guys are going to be like this, working together to push through all of Japan's military interest in World War II. Italy is up next. Italy, just like several other countries after World War I, have been socially, politically, economically devastated. And unfortunately, several of those countries, looking specifically at Germany and Italy, because they were hit so hard right there in the center of Europe during World War I, a lot of destruction and damage done. Again, socially, physically, economically. They're looking for leaders to come in that are going to turn everything around and pick their economy and country back up. But bad news for everybody else is that the guys that come in to do this are the guys that are going to bring in terrorism and bring in dictatorships. So with Italy, we have Benito Mussolini. Know him, star him. He is a fascist dictator. He has a group of followers known as the Black Shirts that will rule using threats, using bribes, using mostly negative types of reinforcement to make sure they get what they want. And they pretty much say that we need to do whatever's necessary to make sure that Italy becomes a world power like they